The date is October of 1962. A small Caribbean island located 90 miles off the coast of Florida is on the brink of causing complete world destruction. How did we get to this point? In order to understand the Cuban Missile Crisis, it is important to first understand the context of the situation. The Cuban people had lived under American imperialism for more than 50 years, so when the pro-American government of Bautista was overthrown by Fidel Castro's guerrilla forces, the Cuban people were ecstatic. Soon after, Castro formed an alliance with the Soviet Union, which completely alarmed the USA and sparked the beginning of the Cuban Missile Crisis, perhaps the most dramatic Cold War confrontation between the USSR and the USA. The main reason that the USA felt so threatened by Cuba's alliance with the Soviet Union was because the island of Cuba was within the USA's sphere of influence. Therefore, it was considered that any government in Cuba should reflect and protect US interests. The USA believed in its right to exercise the right to intervene for the preservation of Cuban independence and for the maintenance of a government adequate for the protection of life, property, and individual liberty. In 1959, when the pro-USA Cuban government of General Fulgencio Batista was overthrown by Fidel Castro, the United States still hoped to control events in Cuba through its economic interest and the presence of a large pro-US middle class. However, Castro's revolutionary reforms involved nationalization of US economic interests, and most pro-US Cubans chose to move to the US rather than to stay and resist. So how did the United States deal with the threat of Castro? Economically, the USA proclaimed an embargo on all exports to Cuba except for occasional food and medicine. This failed because Castro then made economic agreements with the Soviet Union. The USA's reaction to this then led to the famous Bay of Pigs incident. In 1960, President Eisenhower approved a CIA plan to overthrow Castro's government and to supposedly kick the commies out of the USA's backyard. This involved training Cuban refugees for an invasion of Cuba at the Bay of Pigs. In January 1961, John F. Kennedy was elected president and approved the plan. However, the invasion was a failure. Cuban forces captured a large sum of 1,214 of the original 1,400 invaders. These prisoners were released in return for $53 million worth of food and machines paid for voluntary groups in the US. The invasion resulted in severe humiliation for Kennedy and his administration. The CIA had underestimated the strength of popular support for Castro in Cuba, and Castro's air force was much more effective than originally supposed. Due to the extensive failures of the Bay of Pigs invasion, Kennedy lost prestige within the United States and the rest of the world. Furthermore, it set back his attempts to identify the USA with anti-colonialism. Other Latin American governments and people were outraged, which caused the fear of US imperialism in the area to revive. In addition, Castro's support with Cuba increased and his position strengthened. He declared himself to be a Marxist-Leninist and concluded a defensive alliance with the Soviet Union. And as for the Soviet Union, the failure of the Bay of Pigs invasion gave Khrushchev the ammunition to use in criticizing the United States. In the summer of 1962, Khrushchev decided to use the USA's attempted invasion and Kennedy's failure at carrying it out as motivation for installing missiles in the island. Khrushchev stated that his intentions were to protect Cuba and quoted that it was high time America learned what it feels like to have her own land and her own people threatened. Since the US had missiles in Turkey, bordering the Soviet Union, they too felt in danger. Putting missiles in a similar distance away from the US was therefore seen as a way of redressing the balance. In response to this seemingly aggressive act by the Soviet Union, Kennedy summoned a crisis management team, the Executive Committee, to deal with the threat of missiles in Cuba. This period of fearful anticipation became known as the 13 Days. Kennedy ignored the calls from the military for an immediate airstrike followed by an invasion of Cuba, and instead ordered a naval blockade of the island. He further established a quarantine around Cuba to prevent the delivery of any nuclear warheads to the island. For Cuba, it meant they gained support from their people as it showed defiance and strength against America. Although there was reduction in tension, Castro kept trade lines with the US shut. For the US, it seemed like a complete success, as they had resolved highly tense situation and got rid of the chance of the USSR being able to bomb most American cities within minutes. This made Kennedy look very strong and persuasive to get Russia to leave. However, it was revealed only a few years later that America, in exchange for Russia taking their missiles out of Cuba, had to take theirs out of Turkey. For the Soviet Union, they left after diplomatic negotiations, averting a possible war. However, Khrushchev may have been calling a bluff in order to get US missiles out of Turkey. To conclude, it could very well be said that the future of the world depended on the outcome of the Cuban Missile Crisis. The threat of nuclear war became increasingly apparent, so it was vital that Kennedy and Khrushchev came to some sort of agreement. The final repercussions of the crisis were somewhat unsettling. Many years later, Khrushchev claimed that he had won the Cuban Missile Crisis. He had achieved both of his aims, which were 1. That the US did not intrude in Cuban affairs again, and that 2. The US's missiles in Turkey were to be dismantled in November 1962. However, because the Turkey deal was kept secret, the West saw Kennedy as the hero who had faced down communism. Meanwhile, Khrushchev lost prestige. China broke off relations with Russia, and in 1964 he was forced to resign as Soviet leader. In the final outcome of the Cuban Missile Crisis, the world had avoided a nuclear war, but both leaders emerged from it quite rattled by the events. In 1963, a telephone hotline was set up to give instant contact between the two leaders if there was a crisis. Soon after, in 1968, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty was signed, in which the superpowers promised not to supply nuclear technology to other countries. In making these agreements, both sides showed commitment in never coming to the brink of world destruction ever again.